I am and always have been a huge fan of Resident Evil. I remember being, 9 or 10 years old maybe, and watching my older brother play like the original GameCube version of Resident Evil 4 in the basement of our parents' house. And I just remember the game giving me such a distinct, gritty, creepy feeling that was really unlike anything I'd ever kind of seen before. And though it was nerve-wracking for a 9-year-old, I just couldn't take my eyes off of it. So as soon as I got up the nerve to actually play it for myself, I spent the next 15 years playing it over and over and over and over, and then, eventually every other game in the series too, don't worry. But with the 4th entry being my first experience with the titles, and I would dare say my favorite entry in the now almost 30-year-old series, I'm sure you can imagine how elated but also kinda terrified I was to hear that Capcom was doing a remake for it. After their success on the 2 previous remakes for Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3, I felt as though Capcom could learn from any mistakes they made in, those games and use that knowledge to pull off a super killer remake for RE4, but my personal love for the game also sowed a shadow of doubt. They would either hit the nail on the head with this, or they would miss completely. So, how did they fare? In this video, we're going to compare and contrast the main differences between the original game and the remake, including character changes, changes to the main story, and we're also going to go over gameplay mechanics and any differences between boss designs and things like that to try to answer that question. Starting off with characters and story. The remake story follows actually really closely behind that of the original, in that it's still about a parasite worshipping murder cult that's hellbent on taking over the world and all that. But the difference here is that the remake will portray that to you with a straight face. It does away with all of the over-the-top, near constant campiness of the original to take on much more of a grounded and quote-unquote believable theme for its characters and setting. That being said, the remake's most substantial changes are mostly the addition of lore that ties the game a bit tighter into the Resident Evil story as an entire franchise, and also the fleshing out of existing characters and the relationships between one another. But before I get into these characters and their corresponding story beats, here's your obligatory spoiler warning, okay? From here on out, I'm going to be talking about the entirety of Resident Evil 4's story and possibly touching on the story of a few other entries in the series as well. I'll put up a timestamp here that you can flick to if you want to skip the story stuff and get right into the gameplay and mechanics. Thanks for watching. Leon's character, like most of the remake story, is approached with much more of a serious attitude this time around. In the intro cinematic, we can see that Leon struggles a lot more mentally with the events of Raccoon City than he was ever really portrayed to in the original. He even goes as far as to say that his grueling military training was something that took his mind off of the trauma that he received as a result of those events. Training that he insinuates wasn't even voluntary, that he didn't have a choice. After being forced into this government program, we can see in the same intro cinematic who we'll come to know as Jack Krauser, training Leon, which I think is a very interesting and positive change to the story, but we'll talk about Krauser and Leon's relationship in more detail later. Leon's more grim and jaded personality lend well to the more modern outlook of the remake, but it doesn't stop him from still throwing out the odd one-liner for some of that classic Resident Evil cheese.
Hasta luego. Present for you.
I appreciate this. It's nowhere close to the level of ham-fisted silliness that the characters and dialogue in the original had, but in my opinion, for a modern take on Resident Evil 4, this is a good thing. On the other side of that argument, it's nice to see that Capcom didn't go the other route with Leon either, and just turn him into this super depressed, brooding Chris from Resident Evil 6 type of guy.
How about you shut your mouth?
Who's insufferable to even listen to. Adding just a bit more grounding realism to his character was the right call. Leon keeps his troubled but sarcastic attitude for the majority of the game, while still warming up to Ashley as they get more and more comfortable with each other throughout their journey. Speaking of Ashley, let's talk about her.
Ashley's character and her backstory stays roughly the same here in the remake, still being abducted by Krauser and smuggled into our favorite little Spanish village. This time, here in the remake, we can find a note further describing the actual plan for her kidnapping operation in a document called Ashley Graham's Abduction. Still toting the damsel in distress trope, her character has a couple more subtle changes. As she gets more comfortable with Leon, you can see her more keen to actually take action and help, and opening up far more than she ever did in the original. She's far less annoying here, but in the same breath, she has a lot more to say, which is a great turnaround on the writer's part. Especially because she doesn't get a hell of a lot more screen time in the remake than she had in the original, so what she does get fleshes her character out so much more, and turns her from a mindless escort mission objective to a person you get to know and want to help. At times near the beginning of the game, some of that princess attitude can start to peek back out when she's told to do something she doesn't exactly want to do.
Hide.
What? Okay.
But as the game goes on, she becomes more than happy to do what Leon says, and even go a little above and beyond. The banter between Leon and Ashley starts off quite stern and business only, but becomes quite flirty and silly later in the game. They share a couple very serious and heartfelt scenes near the end, and it really lends well towards helping Ashley become more than an objective on a quest journal.
Just give me a heads up before you stab me next time, okay?
Luis gets, I'd say, the most backstory and character development out of any of the characters in the remake, and far, far more screen time. This will probably be the longest character analysis in the video, just due to the sheer amount of plot added to his character, so let's get started. In the original game, Luis's backstory is quite lackluster. Upon meeting him, he'll tell Leon that he used to be a police officer in Madrid, but due to his character's inherent mysterious nature, he doesn't tell us, nor do we find out any other information on him up until his sudden death by the hands of Sadler in the castle section of the game. Only in the last few moments he has the strength to speak before his death does Luis give Leon the parasite suppressing drugs and reveal to Leon that he was once employed by Sadler to research Las Plagas. He was helping our two heroes due to the realization of the harm Sadler and the Los Illuminados could cause if they ever gained any real power, so he defected. We can see Luis come to this revelation through his own writings in some notes he left scattered around the later island section of the game. These are titled Luis's Memos 1 through 5 and go into further detail on his work and involvement with the Los Illuminados before Leon ever even set foot in Spain. Luis, deciding to escape the Los Illuminados, got caught stealing a sample of the Las Plagas, and as a result was locked up in the wardrobe Leon releases him from the first time we meet Luis, thus starting the events of Resident Evil 4.
Little rough, don't you think?
This is all of the backstory Luis really receives in the original, besides maybe some mentions of wanting to recapture him in a few notes left by Chief Mendez and Sadler. As for his character during the events of the original, Luis embodies this really charismatic, suave, mysterious, kind of wisecracking, smooth-talking Spaniard, and you get the sense that he's very confident and sure of himself every time he speaks. The problem is he has very, very little screen time to actually get to show that. Now, I'm not going to say that he's a badly written character in the original, because every time he opens his mouth, he's 100% unapologetically Luis.
Ballistics.
They just don't give him any time after establishing him as this cool, interesting character to actually spread his wings and become cool and interesting. Luis has a grand total of just over 8 minutes of cutscenes and dialogue through the original game. 9 minutes flat if you include the secret game over scene where he shoots Leon in the cabin fight.
Adios, Leon.
He appears periodically throughout the original Resident Evil 4, cracking sarcastic jokes and helping our heroes along their journey, even briefly fighting alongside Leon in the cabin fight sequence, though only for a couple minutes. Never sticking around, saying much of importance, or revealing why or what he's doing in this small remote part of Spain, Luis keeps a mysterious shroud over himself all the way up to his death at the hands of Sadler in the castle, as we discussed in his backstory section. After giving Leon the parasite suppressing drugs, Luis dies in his arms. And in response, Leon delivers one of the funniest, stupidest lines of dialogue in the entire game.
Louis! Louis!
Yeah. You have to remember that Leon's only had 9 minutes of interaction with Luis's character, and in those 9 minutes, Leon has learned nothing about Luis. He doesn't know this guy at all, and he still has the most dramatic, personal reaction to seeing this guy he barely knows die. The best part is, Luis is never even spoken about again by either of our heroes. Ashley doesn't even comment on his body. Look, I know Leon wouldn't want to see this guy die, okay? But the level of emotion attached to his reaction and how the scene is framed to be this super sad, like, intense thing is so unwarranted and out of the blue, just due to the lack of depth and interaction Leon has even had with Luis's character up to this point. It just doesn't make any sense for him to react like this, and it does make it pretty funny. Sorry, Capcom. Here in the remake, Luis's character undergoes some interesting changes, and he has much more longevity in the game and its story. Upon meeting Luis for the first time in the remake, I got the impression that he was much slimier and creepier than he was portrayed to be in the original. At first, I got this sort of greasy used car salesman vibe from him. The best way I can describe it is like he's trying to be the suave, smooth talker that he was in the original, but in reality, he's kinda just a weird, groveling loser, putting on a face to try and seem cool. Which is actually what makes him rather endearing once you get to know him better, and oh boy, do you ever get to know him better. In this new iteration of Resident Evil 4, Luis outlives his 2005 counterpart by a long shot, and actually goes with Leon through the mines and minecart section of the game. But before we get into that, let's take a step back to the village and talk about its connection with Luis and his new backstory. In the remake, it's stated that Luis was born in the village we've all come to know and love, losing his mother during childbirth. He was raised by his grandfather, who he had a very close relationship with, and would tell him fairy tales and stories that he'd come to love even into his adult years. One day, Luis's grandfather was bitten by a particularly ravenous and feral wolf, causing him to contract some sort of infection. This obviously worries a young Luis. In the old man's journal document you can find in Chapter 4, which is Luis's grandfather's, you can read his notes on the progress of the infection symptoms and what they're doing to his mental state. You can also find Chief Mendez's telling of this subplot as soon as you gain access to the attic of his manor. We'll get more into Chief Mendez and his character and story a bit later. In Mendez's document, titled Village Documents Volume 1, he writes fondly of Luis and his grandfather, and also of the illness befalling the old man, which he calls a madness. Near the end of the record, you can read that Luis's grandfather took Mendez's side and ominously stated, "If anything happens, you know what to do." Later that night, a fire erupts in Luis's and his grandfather's home, killing his grandfather and leaving Luis alone and distraught. The next morning, the young Luis was nowhere to be found. It's unclear if his grandfather lit the fire himself as to purge himself of the infection and assure he didn't spread this badness amongst the village, or if the fire was set by Mendez and the villagers, as it seems like Luis's grandfather somewhat alluded to Mendez needing to do something like that when he pulled Mendez aside. Either way, Luis would go on to leave the village and become a highly knowledgeable biologist in his later life, eventually coming to work for Umbrella with an Umbrella Europe's Laboratory 6. This can be seen in photographs found in Luis's laboratory sitting on his desk. Him and his team would go on to produce the NEA parasite used to keep control of the Nemesis T-Alpha tyrant we battle throughout the third entry in the series, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. In both the original RE3 and its 2020 counterpart, we can find notes talking about this achievement and congratulating the team. After realizing the evil nature of Umbrella and the work that he was doing, Luis vanished from the company in the eye of the outside world, deciding to move back home to his remote village in the Spanish countryside. Upon arriving, things were different than when he'd left as a young boy. A strange religious group known as the Los Illuminados has seized leadership over the village, headed by a man named Osmond Sadler. Infecting Luis with the Las Plagas and taking him to a private offshore research facility, Sadler put Luis's biology expertise to work by having him research the mind-controlling Las Plagas parasite they'd found fossilized in amber deep underground, all the while hiding his secret plans to use Las Plagas to take over the world from Luis. After figuring out Sadler's true intentions, Luis was once again stuck in the middle of an evil power trying to take over the world and his own good conscience. With his good nature coming out on top, he uses his research on the removal of the Las Plagas to create a machine that could do just that. After removing his parasite, Luis again attempts to escape his captor's grasp and disappear into the unknown. Exchanging emails with a friend from his younger years in college, he discusses plans to try to escape, emails that would be intercepted by none other than Ada Wong. Ada promises Luis safe passage away from Sadler and the Los Illuminados if he can get her a sample of the amber that the Las Plagas has found fossilized within. Seeing no other real option, Luis takes Ada up on her offer and is shortly after tied up by the now infected Mendez and found by Leon. This is where Luis's backstory ends and the events of Resident Evil 4 Remake begin. As you can see, there's far more backstory and plot points given to Luis this time around. Not only better incorporating him into the RE4 story, but also into the rest of the Resident Evil franchise as a whole. During the events of the remake, Luis is around a little bit more throughout our journey, and we even get to see him meeting up with Ada and talking about their arrangement, shining some light on what Luis is up to when he's not around our heroes. Luis still keeps his mysterious attitude from the original, and once again doesn't tell Leon much about his intent, reason for helping our heroes, or his involvement with Umbrella and his work with Sadler, again up until just before his death. But what makes that okay in the remake, as opposed to it kind of being lame and making him seem like a little bit of a one-note character in the original, is all the new added screen time Luis gets in the remake, and what's said and done during it. As I said before, Luis survives the castle in the remake and is now killed off by Krauser at the end of the mine section. But there's a catch. Not only do we keep the cabin fight section with Luis, but the entire mine section of the game now has you run around with him as your AI partner. Throughout this gameplay section, Luis gives Leon the virus-suppressing drugs, the two fight hordes of Ganados, and Luis is even present to fight alongside Leon in the Double Gigante boss fight. He's also around to accompany Leon through this game's version of the minecart ride. Their banter back and forth during this new time together is quite funny, and it really lets Luis's personality properly shine, as he's constantly referring to the fairy tales he was told as a boy and snapping quick one-liners with Leon.
How even? Is it always like this with you?
It allows you to start actually liking him, unlike in the original, which only has Leon and Luis together for a short period of time in the cabin fight. And even so, during the cabin fight, they don't talk about story or anything of importance, just due to the fact that it's only supposed to be a couple minute long combat section. Here in the remake though, they have plenty of downtime to talk about what's going on. Earlier on, Leon receives a call from Hunnigan letting him know that Luis used to work for Umbrella. When Leon brings this up to him, Luis will admit he did work for Umbrella, but state that Umbrella is gone and he simply wants to make amends for what he's done in the past. During the minecart ride, Luis will explain to Leon the story behind the amber that they're seeing, what it is, and what it's used for. At the end of this section, Leon and Luis ride a long elevator up a mineshaft. Here, Leon asks Luis for the final time to just be straight up with him and tell him why he's actually helping two people he doesn't know. Luis admits to Leon that he was once working for Sadler, and laments that he knows helping them won't make up for what he's done, but he doesn't want to see anyone else get hurt. He's showing regret for what he's done. This makes his helpful actions throughout the game make sense, and adds some complexity that his character drastically needed. They do a much better job humanizing Luis in the remake, making him someone who has motives, regrets, and a past that makes sense with his current actions. Once they arrive at the top of the elevator, Luis is stabbed in the back by Krauser, who then takes back the sample Luis stole, and the first fight with Krauser follows. We'll talk more about the fight itself later. Leon doesn't fare well in this duel, with a gravely wounded Luis saving him with the final 2 shots from his Red 9. Krauser jumps away, and Leon is free to tend to his now dying friend. I'm gonna just let this cutscene play out for you, and I'll discuss it after.
Not looking good, eh, my friend? And such a loss to the ladies of the world.
Don't talk.
Take this. The key to my laboratory. Go there and remove those damn parasites. Help Ashley. You know, I led a pretty shitty life. But now, eh? What do you think, Leon? People can change, right?
After sitting down and making one last wisecrack, Luis gives Leon the key to his laboratory. This is Luis's final act of repent for what he's done. As he struggles to light his final cigarette, Luis tells Leon that both him and Ashley can get their parasites removed there with the machine he created to remove his own. When Luis drops his lighter, Leon actually grabs it and helps him light his cigarette. So to me, that's a pretty clear symbol that Leon actually gives a shit about this guy, and he wants to give him that last puff, because now he's earned it in Leon's eyes. Luis's final line is, "I've led a pretty shitty life, but now, eh? What do you think, Leon? People can change, right?" But before Leon can respond, Luis's body goes limp and he dies. This line has a lot to it. Luis knows he hasn't been the best person, but he also does recognize that he's trying to make up for that. The voice actor does a great job here portraying the uncertainty that Luis has about if he actually has changed or if he actually has made up for his wrongs. We can also see this in the way that he frames this statement as a question to Leon. I think it's also purposeful from the game's writers and significant to Luis's character that he doesn't get to hear Leon's response to this question before he dies. This is such a better emotional scene for Luis's send-off in comparison to the original. There's real feelings of sadness and regret here, and you feel bad Luis has to die without ever really feeling like he's atoned for his sins. Luis's rewrite was fantastic. It turned him from a one-note character that died off without a reason for a character to even really ever mention him again, to someone who has an actual impact on the story. Leon even actually tells Ashley of his death, and they're both genuinely upset by it.
Where's Luis?
He was worried about you. Till the end. Come on. We don't have much time. Let's get rid of these things.
For Luis.
After talking about Luis, I think it's only fitting for the next character we cover to be Batorra's Mendez, as in both iterations of Resident Evil 4, we meet both characters in the same scene. In the original, there isn't a whole lot to Chief Mendez, with his backstory starting with him already years into being the village chief. We'll start back as early as the original lets us. Sometime in the 2000s, Osmond Sadler arrives in the village with intent to take over and control its population through the use of the Las Plagas. Noticing his authority and respect among the villagers, Mendez was the first person Sadler manipulated into believing in the power of the Los Illuminados. By using Mendez's social standing as the chief, Sadler knew he could easily gain the trust of the rest of the village if he could win over Mendez first. Now manipulated into becoming a priest for the cult of the Los Illuminados, Mendez held a gathering at the village chapel alongside Sadler during the village's harvest festival. During this gathering, Mendez allowed Sadler to hold a sermon that would go on to successfully manipulate the majority of the village into believing he's to be trusted and that the Los Illuminados speak the truth. After the sermon, the villagers who blindly followed Sadler's teachings accepted their Plagas injections. Those who did not accept Sadler's influence were either held down and forced to take the injection or were slaughtered by the now crazed Ganados they once knew as friends and family. As the villagers began receiving their Plagas injections, some willingly, others forced, and converting fully to the Los Illuminados, Mendez was given a special dominant variant of the parasite. This allows him to now control these freshly converted Ganados, have incredible strength, healing abilities, inhuman speed, and the ability to mutate into the form that Leon eventually fights in the slaughterhouse. Unfortunately, it's never stated how Sadler actually went about converting Mendez, or what he told him to get Mendez to allow Sadler to inject his subjects with this, to them, mysterious substance. During the events of the original game, he serves as not much more than an imposing brute, a big scary dude in a trench coat that can take a lot of bullets. Mendez only shows up in a whopping 2 cutscenes throughout the entire original game before his boss fight. During both of these cutscenes, he silently throws our protagonist around, with the exception of one single line of dialogue.
You carry the same blood as us, it seems. Nevertheless, you're an outsider. Just remember, if you become unpleasant to our eyes, you'll face severe consequences.
What?
This refers to the successful injection of the parasite into Leon after he was captured with Luis. Other than his minimal screen time, you can also find a few notes Mendez has left around the original game, mostly talking about the escape and recapture of Luis Serra, Luis stealing the sample, and some plans and tactics he's drafted up to try and stop our heroes. Mendez's boss fight is one of the most iconic fights in Resident Evil 4, taking place in a slaughterhouse outside the village near the castle. It has Leon stuck at a close range battle with the chief, but can easily be beaten with incendiary grenades, explosive barrels, and keeping your distance in the first stage. Once Mendez loses his legs, signaling the second stage of the fight, he'll start throwing longer range attacks with his tentacles as he swings around from the rafters. Nonetheless, he's still easily taken down by staying mobile and dodging any quick-time attacks he might throw your way. Once Mendez is finally beaten, Leon can take his false eye off of his body and use it as a key item to unlock a gate, granting Leon and Ashley access to the castle section of the game. This fight in the original is fine, especially for a first-time player, but it's almost brainless to beat once you realize how good incendiary grenades are for it, like even on professional. That, combined with staying as far away as you can from him and just unloading shotgun shells and TMP rounds into his chest, it just makes this fight a little bit too easy. Here in the remake, Torres Mendez has an added backstory and readable files explaining his life and role in the village before the arrival of the Los Illuminados. So let's get into it. Starting before the arrival of the Los Illuminados, Torres Mendez and the village as a whole were a Catholic-based community. We can find a photo of a Catholic priest in Mendez's manor, with a message written on the back which says, "Watch over the village in my stead, and may smiles always find you in photographs." This photo is of the previous village chief handing down leadership to Mendez upon his death. Further into the manor, we can find more photographs and notes left by Mendez, including the Village Records Volume 1 document that we went over in Luis's section. In the beginning of this note, we can see Mendez write that he's going to learn his duties as chief as he goes, and that his first order of business will be to keep a record of the village and its progress. In the attic of Mendez's manor, we can find the Village Records Volume 2. Written several years after Volume 1, this note talks about the village thriving under Mendez's leadership. They have motorized boats to aid with fishing, a forge for making tools and equipment, and Mendez has even opened up the village to outside trade, allowing them to build a fish farm and breed their own food. Mendez goes on to write of how he takes on the role of a teacher, teaching the village children mathematics and literacy during the day. Every night, he shares dinner with a different family so that they can air any grievances they may have, so Mendez can properly solve any quarrels and issues for the betterment of the village. By all accounts, it seems that the village was happy and thriving, and that Torres Mendez was a dependable and respected man. Near the end of the note, Mendez describes the sudden arrival of the Los Illuminados zealots from the distant castle. Preaching of salvation and forgiveness, they injected everyone with a mysterious substance, calling it a cure for madness. Mendez voices his concern for this event, writing down and questioning if these people are actually to be trusted. Those who accepted the injection were told their blood was pure, and those who did not were sinners. After the initial injections, just like in the original, those who rejected Sadler's teaching were forcibly made to take the injection anyways. So that ties me into my thoughts on the remake's new additions to his backstory. I like how they went into detail about who Mendez was before the Los Illuminados. None of that existed in the original game, and it was cool to read. It gives you a sense of how much power the parasite really has to be able to change a man as great as Mendez was into the monster we see in-game. What I'm not sure about, though, is why the writers, just like they neglected to in the original game, still don't explain why Mendez let these random zealots, preaching about a different religion than the village's established Catholic one, come in and inject everyone, including himself, with this mystery substance. He even states that he's unsure of these people in the first place. Like, why would he let them do this? I can understand the switching of religions, because everyone was lied to and injected with the parasite to begin with, and I'm sure the parasite just started to take control of their minds and kind of converted them from the inside out. Like, no one had to really convince these people to switch religions just to take the injection, and that would do it for them. But still, how did they even manage that? I don't know, maybe I'm missing something here that's written in a note that I didn't see in both games, but it seems like a bit of an oversight by the writers there. During the events of the remake, we unfortunately don't get to see a whole lot more of Mendez, especially in contrast with how much more we saw of Luis. He did get a cool hat though. We first meet the Big Cheese in the remake the exact same way as we do in the original, trying to free Luis Serra. A small change I thought I would mention is that in the remake version of this scene, it's actually Mendez himself who injects Leon with the parasite, as opposed to the original where it's a no-name zealot. After escaping his binds and fighting his way through the canyon, Leon finds himself at odds with the chief again while searching through his manor. Mendez grabbing Leon, and like in the original, commenting on his successful infection.
The blood has accepted the gift.
This scene combines itself with the secret cutscene from the original, where if you follow Mendez back into the room he enters, he grabs Leon again and Ada fires at him through the window. The only major difference in this cutscene in comparison to the original one is that Mendez doesn't leap out the window after Ada, he simply walks past a gasping Leon and silently out the door. The next time we see the Chief is in a brand new chase section, where he menacingly trails Leon and Ashley as they fight their way through a horde of ganados. A quick observation I made is that they moved the iconic scene where he bends close the handles of this gate from the slaughterhouse during his boss fight in the original to this chase scene for here in the remake. During this chase sequence, Mendez catching Ashley results in a game over, with him leaping away down a cliff with her over his shoulder. You don't seem to be able to do any damage to him with conventional guns, and your only option is to run. I thought this scene was a cool addition. It's nice to see Mendez in the game world for more than just his boss fight, but on my first playthrough this made me think Mendez was going to be some kind of pursuer enemy like Mr. X or Nemesis from the previous two remakes. But unfortunately that wasn't the case. It's just a one-time encounter with the Big G's, and his boss fight follows shortly after. I don't think keeping him around as a pursuer enemy for the whole game would have been a good idea, but I think it would have been cool for a short section of the village or something like that. Maybe like in the canyon when he captures Leon and Luis and removes all Leon's weapons. He could have been a pursuer during that section, stalking Leon while he tries to get his gear back scattered around the area and trying to escape the canyon. I don't know. For what it is, it's just cool to see him in something other than a cutscene, but I'm glad they put this in either way. After chasing our heroes and muttering a few lines about our souls needing cleansing,
Your soul requires cleansing.
we escape over a rickety bridge before it collapses, leaving Mendez staring us down from the other side. The cutscene for Mendez's boss fight is slightly different here, with him jumping through the wall, smashing into Leon before leaping down onto the floor of the slaughterhouse. Mendez has some extra lines here, which serve well to paint him as a crazed sentinel of the Los Illuminados cult.
Cease your pointless struggling. Abandon your body to the will of our God.
You're a shitty missionary. You know that.
Oh, Almighty, grant me the strength to crush your enemies.
Leon tells Ashley to run, and we get his classic hasta luego line before he shoots the explosive barrel, changing Mendez into his mutated form. I'm not a fan of the fact that they took away Mendez's transformation scene here. You got to see his full mutation in the original game, and it was done so well and served as this great oh shit moment that isn't as well executed in my opinion here in the remake. His boss fight, on the other hand, is much better. Mendez has many more attacks than he had in the original, and his swings have a much longer range even in his first stage. This makes the keep your distance tactic from the first game a lot less viable and the fight all around more tense. The arena is more or less the same, with Mendez throwing some quick time event attacks at you if you're caught on the upper level. Once his legs come off and his second phase begins, he'll swing around on the rafters much like the original game, with the remake allowing him to sit back and throw pieces of burning debris at you and also attempting to throw explosive barrels. These can be shot while he's holding them in his tentacles, exploding and causing some good damage. Once the Big Cheese is eliminated, a cutscene that's almost identical to the original will play, and his false eye will slide out of his gross, dead face. Ashley will then pick up a stool and use it to smash out a window for Leon to escape through, again showing Ashley with a bit more initiative than we've ever seen her with in the past. Next up is Napoleon himself, Ramon Salazar. Even in the original game, Ramon has some interesting backstory. It's stated that Ramon inherited the Salazar family castle at a very young age, implying he had no close family around, or for whatever reason they weren't in the picture. I'm not sure the original ever really addresses the reason for this. We can find a document in chapter 2-3 in the parlor room called Castellan Memo that has Ramon writing about his distant family's past. The first few lines of this note talk about the Salazar family living within this castle for many years, and that the Los Illuminados were around all those years ago as well. The first Castellan of the castle banished the Los Illuminados and took away their rights and any power they had at the time. We can also see Luis write about this event in more detail in the Luis's Memo 2 document, stating that the first Castellan buried the Las Plagas parasites deep underground beneath the Salazar family's castle, sealing them off in an attempt to hide the parasites' existence. Years later, with only a young Ramon living in the castle with no one but his butler to counsel him, Osmond Sadler took advantage of these circumstances and approached the impressionable young boy to manipulate him for his own means. He convinced the young Ramon that his family's past actions towards the Los Illuminados were unjust, that his family was in the wrong, and that they were evil and sinful. With nowhere for Ramon to look for guidance, he quickly believed Sadler's lies. Successfully converting Ramon to the Los Illuminados religion, Sadler then manipulated him into breaking the seal below the castle, allowing the Las Plagas parasite to begin being excavated. We can read Ramon's writings on this event firsthand in the rest of the Castellan Memo document. There's another note covering this event as well, found in chapter 3-4 in the servants' quarters called the Butler's Memo. Here, Ramon's butler claims that Ramon would never do such a thing if he was not manipulated, showing this butler's perceptive eye during this situation, and how Ramon was never inherently evil here in the original. Near the end of Luis's Memo 2, we can see Luis talk about the excavation of the Las Plagas and how several years later the villagers involved in the mining operation began having severe convulsions. He goes on to state that these same villagers would have rage-induced fits and soon become violent savages. They later found out that this was caused by the Las Plagas. Although they appeared fossilized, they were able to survive the long years by lying in a dormant state at the cellular level, remaining in a spore-like form. Apparently, during the excavation, the villagers inhaled the spores and within their bodies the parasites became active again. This is how the Las Plagas were resurrected. A quick note. During the research for this video, I found a few, plot holes in the story about how the village came to actually be infected. In both versions of Resident Evil 4, there's things saying that Sadler and the Los Illuminados came and injected everyone, and there's also things that say that the spores from the mine were what infected everyone. The conclusion I've come to is that it was a bit of both, because no one reason is really more legit than the other. All this info comes right from the games and documents you can find in them, so I'm not totally sure on that, but there's all the info anyways. That's all the info on Ramon's backstory I could find in the original game, so let's get into what his character was like during it. Meeting him for the first time in the beginning of the castle, Ramon is one of the most eccentric and dialogue-heavy villains on offer here in the original game. Our heroes will come face to face with Ramon several times throughout the castle section, sharing some very entertaining back and forth with Leon in almost every scene. These encounters with Ramon are where some of the most famous and cheesy lines from the original game are born, and the point where this iteration of RE4 begins to really show how it differs in tone from its 2023 counterpart.
I've been expecting you, my brethren.
No thanks, bro.
My.
Ramon is one of two villains to begin calling Leon over his radio, and through this medium is how a large majority of his interaction with Leon will be seen. Showing his face for 3 cutscenes and multiple radio calls before his boss encounter, Ramon and his 2 Verdugo bodyguards will steal Ashley away and attempt to kill our heroes in several elaborate traps and ambushes. Acting as an annoying pest throughout the entire castle section, and successfully taking Ashley once again, Ramon will ship her away to the third and final area of the original game, the island. Following has us entering Ramon's boss fight, where he merges himself and one of his Verdugo bodyguards with the Queen Plagas, creating a foul hybrid for Leon to attempt to take down. Ramon's fight has us on an elevated balcony, with Ramon stuck to the wall in a mass of tentacles. All his attacks here are very telegraphed and can easily be avoided by simply running out of the way, but if you can't move fast enough, his swings also come with a handy quick-time event that you can use to flip out of the way, something that's all too common in the original game. This fight has us firing into Ramon's eyeball-shaped weak spot, most efficiently with a pistol or TMP until he opens up and reveals his largely mutated body within the queen parasite. This is where your real damage is dealt, and the boss can easily be killed using the broken butterfly here or a single rocket launcher. This fight is harrowingly simple and easy using these late game weapons, making it one of my least favorites in the original. Below the balcony we're standing on, there's a pit full of Plaga spiders. If you can brave these creatures, there are multiple barrels down here containing healing items and other equipment to aid you in your fight, though the chances of you needing such help are very slim. I can't say I've ever gone down here until after the fight is over. Once Ramon is dead, he and the queen parasite will mostly dissolve away, revealing the exit to the arena and a large stack of pesetas. Overall, this fight honestly kinda sucks. This is by far my least favorite in the original mechanically. There's just not enough to it to make it very engaging. I mean, run left, shoot, run right, shoot. You know, even Mendez's boss fight has you at least needing to keep your distance in the first phase and switches up his range and attack pattern for the second one. I don't know. Ramon and the entire Salazar family's backstory is majorly the same in the remake, but with quite a bit of detail added to the story given in the original. We can find a note called Salazar Family Chronology in the castle's water hall / courtyard area, giving us a much closer look at the past actions of the Salazar family. This note begins with its author explaining that Ramon had a strange illness when he was a young boy, an illness that Ramon's mother, Catalina, figured could be cured by, as the writer puts it, inviting the devil into their home, referring to, of course, the Los Iluminados and the Las Plagas. The note goes on to describe the notable actions of the Salazar family, and which ancestor actually did what in the event of the exile of the Los Iluminados and the sealing away of the Las Plagas under the castle. This is mentioned in the original game, but the remake fleshes this out much more. At the end of this note, we can read that Ramon's father, Diego, was killed by this very same devil. As a young boy, Ramon was belittled and made fun of by his father and peers for his short stature, possibly stemming from his mysterious sickness. This would slowly begin to eat at his self-esteem until it was so low that Ramon would become malicious and sadistic to anyone who may utter his name in vain. This differs to his backstory in the original, where Ramon only begins to act evil after Sadler has manipulated him, his butler stating that Ramon would never act this way unless he was being influenced. In the remake though, we can read evidence of Ramon already being a sick and twisted individual long before the influence of the Los Iluminados or the mind-altering effects of the Las Plagas. In the castle docks, we can find a note from the castle's housekeeper, proclaiming to Ramon's father, Count Diego the Severe, that he could not fulfill Diego's final wish of keeping Ramon off of the path of wickedness and away from his evil tendencies. This same note states that when he was still a boy, Ramon had overheard a servant girl calling him a name behind his back, Pulgrecito, referring to a Spanish fairy tale in which the main character, Pulgrecito, is a dwarf. Throughout this story, Pulgrecito is able to work around his tiny stature and achieve amazing feats for such a small man, gaining the respect of his family and friends, something that Ramon was never able to do. Upon hearing this, Ramon would summon the servant girl to his chambers and proceed to torture her by pouring acid over her face until it killed her, reportedly grinning and laughing throughout this entire terrifying event. Ramon even references Pulgrecito in dialogue during his boss fight, throwing the same insults at Leon that he was hearing about himself at a very young age. We'll talk more about Ramon's boss fight near the end of his section. The note goes on to describe how Sadler and the Los Iluminados would use Ramon's known twisted nature and inflated feelings of inferiority as an easy way for them to get into the castle and recruit him, as to usurp his position of power. Once Ramon was converted, they would get him to unseal the Plagas under the castle, just like in the original. In another note found in the castle throne room called Ramon's Confession, we can read Ramon's own telling of this event. I actually really like these additions to Ramon and his family, especially how in the remake Ramon joins the Los Iluminados almost without needing to be convinced, since he's already such a mental case before Sadler even shows up. He wants this power to compensate for his insecurity, as opposed to how it plays out in the original, where Ramon is simply too young to know better when Sadler is manipulating him, and he's alone, so he doesn't have anyone to tell him that Sadler's bad news. The character flip from Ramon being innocent in the beginning to him being evil from the beginning is a cool switch around. During the events of the remake, Ramon is far less comical in dialogue than he is in the original, replacing that humor with more of a sinister and evil feel. This is also helped by the fact that Ramon will no longer call Leon at his radio, instead speaking to him through the castle's one-way announcement system.
She said meeting you once was enough.
This greatly reduces the actual conversation time Leon and Ramon have in the remake, since Leon can't actually respond, so this cuts back on Leon's one-liner syndrome pretty heavily. Only seeing Leon face to face in a total of 4 cutscenes, including his boss fight, Ramon's actual actions within the remake remain very much the same. Still trying to catch our heroes in ambushes and traps, this time, unlike the original, we get to see the ritual that's performed on Ashley before she's taken away to the island, along with her being carried off by Krauser himself as we enter Ramon's boss room. Ramon's boss fight in the remake is about 10 times better than its 2005 counterpart, with a completely different fight mechanically. Entering his boss room, Leon will find Ramon with no sign of his one remaining Verdugo bodyguard. Leon will shoot Ramon, making him fall off the multi-level platform they're suspended on into a mass of black, plaga goo shit. Ramon still merges with the Queen Plaga here, but unlike in the original, he merges with it alone since there's no Verdugo by his side, as the remake has it currently off fighting Ada in separate ways. Ramon emerges from this goo in his boss form, and the fight begins. Instead of being pinned to the wall like in the original game, Ramon has full movement around the arena here. Climbing around at all elevations with his huge tentacles, he'll mostly be spitting ranged attacks at Leon, some of them having the ability to span the entire arena with one attack. For being such a huge target, Ramon is remarkably hard to hit in the remake with his incredible speed and erratic movement. After dealing a fair amount of damage, Ramon will fall to the ground and expose his mutated body like in the original, where once again your main damage will be dealt with either a knife QTE or shooting him the old-fashioned way. After doing this a few times over, Ramon will hit the ground for the final time, dying and dropping his lip rouge to sell at the merchant. This is the hardest fight in the game in my opinion. I haven't been able to discern an easy method to beat it like I could in the original. Even if you use your highest power guns, you need so much ammo and some incredible aim to even make it out of the fight alive. This is my favorite boss in the game, and I think they did an excellent job rebuilding it from the ground up to be a much more engaging experience. Having Salazar able to move around made him much more of a threat, and his attacks are now challenging to dodge and not nearly as predictable. Top notch, Capcom. When it comes to Krauser, he's a bit of an oddball in the way that he was originally planted in the Resident Evil timeline. His first time on screen is in the original Resident Evil 4, serving as a late-game antagonist for Leon. The first time Krauser and Leon meet up in the original, the dialogue makes it immediately clear that these two have a history together, with Krauser goading to Leon about believing him dead in a crash 2 years prior. The writers keep the details of this past relationship very foggy throughout Krauser's entire time here in the original game, with players not knowing who this guy actually is to Leon even, way after the game has ended. That is, until 2009 when Capcom had released the Dark Side Chronicles, with one of that game's scenarios completely covering the time Leon and Krauser spend together and exactly what they did. I'm going to briefly cover the plot of the Dark Side Chronicles in this video, as it technically serves as the full backstory for Krauser in both versions of Resident Evil 4, although these events are somewhat different in the remake character's rework. As we know, after the events of Raccoon City, Leon was put into a top-secret military training program designed by the US government to combat bioterrorism on a worldwide scale. In 2002, Leon would be sent to South America in hopes of finding a local drug lord by the name of Javier Hidalgo that is in alleged contact with a former Umbrella researcher. Leon wouldn't be doing this alone though, instead being sent in with a second agent, an esteemed and highly experienced Special Forces operative and a ranked major by the name of Jack Krauser. Upon beginning this mission, Krauser doesn't much believe in BOWs, believing them to be in the same realm as what you and I would think of as cryptids. As their mission progresses, our two heroes very quickly encounter BOWs, specifically ones that are infected with the T. Veronica virus.
Krauser, having never fought against a BOW of any kind before, is understandably taken aback by this and asks Leon about his time in Raccoon City and if he ever experienced anything like this while he was there. Leon tells Krauser about the events of Raccoon City and lets him in on the true nature of their mission. When Krauser was assigned to this mission by the US government, it was under the false pretense that he and Leon would be taking down a drug cartel and capturing its leader. As much as this is true, Krauser's superiors kept from him the fact that Javier Hidalgo's drug trade was only a front for his true operation, the exportation and sale of the TNT Veronica virus. This is why Leon was chosen for this mission in particular, due to his experience with such things. Krauser takes this information as somewhat of an insult to his career and military service, now realizing he was assigned to help Leon on Leon's mission, not the other way around. Upon learning this, Krauser feels as if he's seen as nothing more than an unknowing, disposable pawn in comparison to Leon in the eyes of the US government and the country he's worked so hard to serve. Taking down hordes of BOWs throughout the mission, Krauser sees firsthand the incredible power that bioweapons possess and also deeply internalizes the fact that it is possible to harness and remain in control of that power as long as you're mentally and physically strong enough to do so. Near the end of the game, Krauser is greatly wounded by a BOW. This experience would further solidify his interest in the power of BOWs, as his years of military training were trumped in just mere seconds by the creature. After the successful completion of Operation Javier, Krauser found that the damage he sustained to his arm was irreparable, eventually losing use of his left arm and being involuntarily discharged from the military. This added to the overall bitterness he already had surrounding Operation Javier and would be the event that finally broke him, causing him to get in contact with none other than Albert Wesker. The two would go on to plan a way to fake out Krauser's death, and the events of Resident Evil 4 would soon follow. During the events of the original Resident Evil 4, Krauser's role starts with the kidnapping of Ashley Graham. Acting as a spy under Albert Wesker, Krauser was tasked with infiltrating the Los Illuminados cult to retrieve one of their dominant plagas. After kidnapping and delivering Ashley to Osmond Sadler to gain the cult's trust, he was given a dominant control plagas of his own. Being power-hungry and still bitter about the events of Operation Javier, he would accept this plagas and be granted its superhuman benefits. Sadler would never fully trust Krauser though due to him being an American, so Ada Wong was deployed to watch over Krauser and retrieve the sample if he were to fail or be discovered as a double agent. During this plan to extract a Plagas sample, Krauser and Ada would encounter Leon in his mission to save Ashley. With Krauser and Ada already highly distrustful to one another, having Leon around added much more tension to their relationship as they both have completely opposing views on Leon. After a few mysterious cutscenes teasing Krauser's appearance, this tension would boil over when Krauser attacks Leon in a close quarters knife fight, revealing he faked his death and his malicious role in the game's events to Leon. The ensuing knife fight is done entirely through QTEs, and as silly as a QTE cutscene seems these days, this was incredibly cool for the time and still stands up to modern titles in terms of animation work, in my opinion. This fight results in Ada having to save Leon from Krauser overpowering him, and also signals an end to Ada and Krauser's uneasy relationship. Now realizing he needs to kill both Leon and Ada, Krauser jumps away until we see him again for the first part of his multi-phase boss fight. The first section of Krauser's fight in the original has Leon running a gauntlet of sorts, trying to collect 3 insignias that'll open a gate with Ashley being held on the other side. While Leon attempts to retrieve these insignias, he has to contend with a few classic Resident Evil statue pushing / lever puzzles, all while Krauser fires at him with his explosive compound bow, lobs hand grenades, and hipfires his TMP from the tops of buildings across this ancient set of ruins. These puzzles and shooting range sections are broken up by areas where Krauser will leap down onto Leon's route and charge him with his combat knife. While Krauser's on the ground with Leon, he'll trigger a few small QuickTime event cutscenes if he gets too close, and pull out his TMP if he's at any sort of range. Once enough damage has been done to Krauser, he'll drop a flashbang at his feet and disappear back into the shadowy ruins, beginning to fire at Leon from the rooftops once again. There's even this weird QuickTime event thing where you can respond to Krauser's trash talk. Kind of a weird choice. But anyways, I digress. This repeats for several minutes until Leon has collected 2 of the 3 insignias. This triggers Krauser's transformation using his dominant Plagas, and triggers the second phase of his boss fight. Now, having a large mutated blade on his left arm, which if you didn't catch it, it's the same arm that was disabled during Operation Javier, so there's a bit of symbolism for you. He can now strike Leon with absolutely crushing blows that can be dodged with a QTE or evaded with movement if you're quick enough. Along with superhuman dodges, Krauser also has the ability to form this blade into a large shield, blocking any of Leon's small arms fire. This can be countered by shooting Krauser in the legs until he staggers, where you can then get some good damage in with a magnum or a shotgun. Repeat this process a few times, and Krauser will eventually go down without even a word of dialogue, dropping the final insignia for Leon and letting our hero run for safety before the explosive timer reaches 0. I'll give the game some grace for not having any dialogue for Krauser's death here, because he technically isn't dead. Ada finishes him off in the OG's version of Separate Ways.
That's a large thing you have there. But I don't like it when men play rough.
I've heard a lot of people say that this fight is their least favorite in the game, just because of how long it is and how QTE intensive it is. I wouldn't say that it's my least favorite, but I can definitely feel the game's age in this fight. I'd imagine it goes so hard on the QTEs because the game, it just isn't mechanically designed for a fast-paced one-on-one hand-to-hand fight like this is trying to portray. Resident Evil 4 is a very slow, deliberate game with how you move and fight, especially if you want to swing the knife. So as soon as the knife's equipped, you're actually rooted to the ground. You can't move. So I think the QTE spam was Capcom's way of trying to have this sort of battle shoehorned into a game that's made to be played the opposite way, really. I always enjoy this fight when I do run through the game, just because it's very different from every other fight, and I like to think of it as kind of just a fun change of pace. Here in the remake, some of Krauser's backstory has been retconned or completely replaced. Operation Javier still happened and serves as his backstory still, but the events of Operation Javier itself have been rewritten. There's a note we can find in the island section of the remake, an article written by an unknown American journalist called Redacted Case File. This note dives into Operation Javier and explains that the operation itself was still about the cartels initially, but something went wrong during this mission. Something wrong enough that the US government wanted to cover it up immediately. The team of Special Forces operators that was sent in were in turn left for dead by the US government and military, the entire unit being completely wiped out, except for its commanding officer, Jack Krauser. We can see that in this retelling of the Operation Javier story, it doesn't ever mention Leon, and that's because in the remake's world, Leon was never there. So how do Krauser and Leon know each other then? Well, back at the start of the video, I mentioned that in the intro cutscene we can see none other than Krauser training Leon. In the remake's retelling of the story, when Leon was forced into his government agent training after the events of Raccoon City in Resident Evil 2, the US government placed him under the care of Jack Krauser to carry out his military training. During this time, Krauser would teach Leon everything he knows about hand-to-hand combat, firearms, military tactics, and mold him into the perfect agent we play as in RE4. Now, after training Leon, Krauser would be sent on Operation Javier for him and his men to be left for dead / killed off, and after surviving the attempt on his life, he would somehow disappear into obscurity. This time around in the remake, Krauser never actually gets in contact with Wesker. This means that he's never actually sent to Spain to infiltrate the Los Illuminados, but comes to find the cult organically in his own pursuit of power. He essentially just finds the Los Illuminados and joins them of his own free will, hungry for power and wanting revenge on the US for Operation Javier. From this point on, his story is generally the same as the original, being given the dominant Plagas and carrying out the abduction of Ashley. This time, though, it's not as a way to garner trust from the cult, it's because he truly believes in it. During the events of the remake, the first time we meet Krauser has him plunging his blade into Luis's back, causing his death. In this cutscene, it's once again made very clear that Krauser and Leon have a past relationship, with Leon calling him Major Krauser and asking him why he's doing this. After Krauser tells Leon that he was recovering Luis's stolen sample, Leon puts two and two together and realizes that it was Krauser who abducted Ashley and that he is working with the Los Illuminados. This kicks off the Remake's version of the QTE knife fight from the original, only this time it's not a cutscene. With the Remake allowing for more fluid movement and better mechanics on the knife, such as the parry, this becomes a lot more of a fight and a lot less of an interactive cutscene, which is cool. During this fight, Krauser and Leon will go back and forth about Operation Javier, and Leon tries to talk Krauser out of what he's doing, but Krauser simply tries to justify it for the sake of revenge. Krauser fights with his knife in a very similar way to Leon, neither man being able to land a substantial blow on the other, really driving home the feeling that Krauser is an equal to Leon. Not to mention that Krauser calls Leon rookie for the rest of the game. It really wants you to focus on their dynamic as teacher and student. After a few minutes, Krauser will best Leon and manage to get him on his back, this time with Luis being the one to shoot at Krauser to save Leon instead of Ada. A side note, since Krauser doesn't work for Wesker in the remake, him and Ada actually never meet on screen in the base game. Krauser will jump away like in the original, talking down to Leon and telling him that he's still the same kid he was when they first met. We only see Krauser one more time before his boss fight, when Salazar delivers Ashley to him right before Salazar's own boss fight. No dialogue is spoken by Krauser here, he just takes Ashley and runs off with her, taking her to the island. After following Krauser to the island with the help of Ada, Leon will come face to face with Krauser again for the first stage of his actual boss fight. This takes place much in the same way that it did in the original, with Leon making his way through a gauntlet of puzzles and booby traps while Krauser fires at him from above with an assortment of weapons. This time, for whatever reason, there's no insignias to pick up. Krauser will still jump down to fight Leon hand to hand, and this time it feels a whole lot better. As I mentioned before, the remake's mechanics allow for the hand-to-hand sections to be a lot more interactive and in real time than they were in the original. There's still the odd QTE thrown in, but the majority of the fight is using the combat knife and parry mechanics to their full extent, making this part much more engaging to play. This is what the original wanted this fight to feel like, I think, but the technology just wasn't there yet. For the duration of this fight, Krauser will constantly talk down to Leon, calling him rookie, making comments on his form and skill in combat, telling him that he's getting sloppy, anything to put himself above Leon in any way that he can. This goes on for a few minutes until enough damage is dealt to Krauser that he'll change into his mutated form from the original game, crashing into the ground and creating a hole into an underground section of the ruins. Once Leon makes his way out of the tunnels, he finds himself on a 2-story platform, with the drawbridge being pulled up, cutting off his exit. This is where we fight Krauser's new third and final form, sporting a new giant claw to go along with his blade. In this phase of the fight, Leon can use his knife to parry some of Krauser's attacks, but it's mostly firearms that'll do the trick here. Krauser's fast, and he can hit very hard, making this fight one of the more difficult ones in the game. Using the ladder to go up and down the platforms, you can create enough distance to get a few shots in before Krauser can catch up. In my experience, this technique is far easier than trying to fight him on one level for the entire fight. Periodically, Krauser will leap onto the cliffside above and do a very powerful slam attack that can kill you outright if you've already taken a bit of damage. If you're caught close to the edge of the platform, Krauser will knock Leon off and try to stomp his hands until he falls. Using a QTE, Leon can pull himself back up and stab Krauser in the leg to get away. Once Krauser's defeated, this cutscene will play.
Beat that out of you! Oh, that big rookie! Show me!
What you have to do. That's right.
did, Major. Yeah, you did.
After a long, hard-fought battle, Krauser finally goes down, letting Leon take his knife and end the fight for good. I like how Leon looks at himself in the reflection of Krauser's knife in the same way that Krauser does in a cutscene before he's properly introduced. I think it serves to once again paint Leon as Krauser's equal, or like Krauser is Leon's sort of dark reflection. Two men caught up in bioterrorism plots with the same skill set but on opposite sides of the coin. Krauser even says, "I trained you well, Leon," for the first time ever calling Leon by his name, showing at least some fraction of respect for the fact that Leon overcame and eventually defeated him. The student has become the master, and good has overcome evil. I like all of Krauser's rework in the remake. The character is used in so much more of an impactful way here. His boss fight lends far, far better to the updated controls and mechanics. In the OG, if you didn't know if you didn't know Krauser's backstory, he really does kind of just pop up out of nowhere, and you're sort of just told that Leon and Krauser have history through their dialogue, right? The remake makes it so that, even if this is the only Resident Evil content you've ever consumed, you can still follow along and know who Krauser is and why he knows Leon, because they show you why he knows Leon in the first 30 seconds of the intro cutscene. It's a much tidier and less convoluted way to introduce his character, and I think they did a great job with it. So Ada is a bit tricky to talk about backstory-wise, because almost nothing is actually known about her besides her actions during Resident Evil 2 and 4. We don't even know if Ada Wong is her real name, what nationality she is, nothing really. All we know for certain is that Ada worked for a rival company, only ever referred to as Rival Company, before she worked for Wesker and Umbrella. This is why she's trying to steal the G-Virus in Resident Evil 2. Other than that, there's almost no information on her. Technically, there does exist a sort of Chinese manga on Resident Evil 2, in which Ada tells Leon a story about her past, but this book isn't known to be canon or line up with the overall Resident Evil story, so I'm hesitant to talk about it here. What we do have, though, is her appearance in Resident Evil 4, so let's just jump right into that. During the original game, Ada is as mysterious and deadly as ever. She shows up very early in the game, shooting Mendez through the window in a secret cutscene, where if Leon follows Mendez back into his room after being grabbed in the hallway of his house, he'll once again give Leon a good thrashing before his attention is taken by Ada, and he throws himself through the window after her. I'm not sure Leon ever sees her though, as by the end of it all, he's still gasping for air on the ground and trying to get a hold of himself. The first time Leon and Ada actually speak is in the castle section of the game in a room right next to the dog maze. In this cutscene, after a quick slow-motion fight scene, Leon recognizes Ada, I guess because she took her sunglasses off? I don't know. He tries to question her about working for Wesker, and to this she basically laughs in his face and says, "What does it matter to you?" Before whatever reason her sunglasses explode like a flashbang, she grabs her gun, gives Leon a good old one-liner, and runs off. Objectively, this scene is pretty silly. Leon not recognizing her until she takes her glasses off, her glasses being a flashbang that she doesn't even use as a distraction to get away. She just lets it go off and then waits around so she can give Leon a one-liner before she leaves. I don't know, it's pretty dumb. Throughout the game, Ada helps Leon multiple times, giving him a lift to the island, shooting at Krauser during the QTE knife fight. She even takes on Sadler so Leon and Ashley can make an escape before their final encounter with him. Each and every time Ada helps Leon, he tries to get her to explain what she's doing here in Spain, and in typical Ada fashion, she just blows him off and walks away every time. I don't think there's any real reason given by the original for why Ada actually helps Leon. I think it's just kind of an unspoken thing that Leon and Ada have a thing for one another after their little smooch in RE2. And the fact that she cares about him is really the only reason she helps him here in Resident Evil 4. As to why Wesker has her out here in Spain, Leon may not know until the end of the game, but we as the player are treated to other cutscenes that explain exactly what she's doing here. So Ada was sent in alongside Krauser to steal a sample of the Plagas. Reason being that Krauser isn't fully trusted by the Los Illuminados because he's of American descendancy. So Wesker sends in Ada as well so she can finish the mission in the event that Krauser gets made or is killed. Unfortunately for Krauser, he's not only defeated by Leon, but also defeated and killed by Ada in separate ways. After being captured and used as bait by Sadler to get Leon to approach in the open, Ada is freed and throws Leon the rocket launcher that kills Sadler and ends the game. After this, Leon goes to collect the sample that Sadler had on him, to which Ada puts a gun to Leon's head, and in that moment, Leon figures out exactly what Wesker had her here for all along. Ada takes the sample and swan dives into a helicopter before arming the island to self-destruct and tossing Leon a set of keys to a jet ski down below.
Cute.
Narratively, Ada doesn't actually do a whole lot here in the original, at least from the perspective of the base game. She sort of is kind of just here to be Krauser's handler and oversee their mission. What I can say about Ada though is that if she wasn't around to help Leon where she was, Leon might be dead a few times over by now. Every time Ada shows up to lend a hand, Leon's literally 2 seconds away from 100% getting killed. Could you imagine if she wasn't there with the boat to help Leon get to the island? The game may as well have just ended right there. So with Ada flying away in a chopper and Leon and Ashley escaping on a jet ski, let's get into Ada's new role in the remake. Ada's character and actions in the remake are very similar to the original, but the reason she's doing these things are indeed different. With Krauser no longer being a part of Umbrella in the remake's universe, Ada doesn't have to watch over him anymore. In fact, in the base game they never even come face to face. This frees up her character to take part in some new story beats and help flesh out some other characters as well. I'm of course referring to Luis, who's now been rewritten to be helping Ada retrieve the Plaga sample for Wesker and in return have Ada and Wesker help him escape the Los Illuminados. We first meet Ada in the remake in the same way as we do in the original, with her firing at Mendez through a window while he's attacking Leon. This time it's mandatory though, and it's not a secret cutscene. Again, Leon doesn't actually catch a glimpse of Ada here, with her meeting Leon in person in the castle. This particular cutscene is nowhere near as dumb as the original one, and Ada and Leon's dialogue back and forth is far more thought out here. Leon recognizes her right away, there's no flashbangs, and the whole thing is far more human. This is a running theme between Ada and Leon, as Ada shows up almost note for note in the exact same spots as she does in the original game, like the first scene in the castle, helping Leon with a boat to the island, saving Leon and Ashley from Sadler, etc, etc. But this time, when they speak, it's a lot less flashy and campy. Ada still keeps her mysterious and seductive tone towards Leon throughout the entire game, don't get me wrong, but it's far more believable here in the remake. There's some minor changes to what happens in these cutscenes, things like when Ada saves Leon and Ashley from Sadler, it takes place in a temple/cave now and not in a lab like in the original. Ada still won't outright tell Leon why she's in Spain, but Leon does put together right away that she's been working for Umbrella here in the remake. Again, the only sensical reason Ada would be helping Leon is that she cares about him. Other than that unspoken rule, she still gives no other reason here. She even takes this to the next level, offering Leon a ride out on the helicopter she catches at the end of the game. Leon of course refuses, and the remake's version of the jet ski escape ensues. Besides her encounters with Leon being relatively the same as in the original, she has new cutscenes with Luis talking about her plan to retrieve the sample, and some radio calls with Wesker about the state of her mission. Personally, I think it was a pretty good idea on the writer's part to separate Krauser and Ada's stories and instead connect Ada to Luis's story and Leon to Krauser's like they've done. It just makes everybody more like coherent, and it's much clearer who everybody is and what they're doing and why they're doing it. Osmond Sadler is the big bad in both versions of Resident Evil 4, with him resurrecting the ancient Las Plagas and orchestrating the abduction of Ashley Graham. I've somewhat already gone over Sadler's backstory in Salazar and Mendez's section of this video, but I'll recap here so that it's all in one place. In the events of the original game, Sadler arrives in the village sometime in the early 2000s. With him, he brings the cult of the Los Illuminados, a long-thought-dead religious group that was banished and exterminated by the Salazar family that rules over the castle nearby long ago. With the intent to control the village population, Sadler makes his way to the Salazar castle. Knowing that the Las Plagas are sealed in the caves underneath the castle, he manipulates the lone surviving Salazar family member that still resides in the castle, a young, impressionable Ramon Salazar, into letting the cult unseal the caves below and begin excavating the long-dormant Las Plagas parasites. During this excavation, spores released by the fossilized Plagas would enter the lungs of the villagers that worked in the mines, soon growing large enough to control the infected person outright. Noticing this, and with the parasites finally awoken, Sadler would have a large offshore research facility built, and begin research on ways to genetically modify the parasites to suit his needs. He would go on to create different strains and versions of the parasite, including a master variant that he would inject into himself, that gave him the ability to control any subordinate strain parasites. He would also create the dominant parasite that allowed the infected person to keep their higher level brain function, but still be able to control and direct a base level subordinate ganado as if they had the master parasite. He gives one of these dominant plagas to Ramon Salazar. With a sizable following from the infected mine workers behind him, Sadler would decide to expand his ranks to the villages in the surrounding area, including the one that the beginning of the game takes place in. To do this, he would start by converting the village's leader, Torres Mendez, into becoming a zealot for the Los Illuminados, manipulating the chief into taking an injection containing a dominant plaga. Using Mendez's high standing and respect in the village, Sadler would have Mendez allow him to host a sermon during the small Spanish village's harvest festival. With some of the village's population already infected from working in the mines, and the villager's leader himself infected with a dominant plaga, it didn't take long between the sermon and brute force injections to convert the rest of the village over to the Los Illuminados. With Sadler's influence growing rapidly, he would decide it was time to take the next step with his master plan to take over the world. With this, he would get in contact with who he thinks is a lone mercenary, Jack Krauser, to carry out his plan to abduct and infect the president's daughter, Ashley Graham, before sending her back home as an attack on the US people and government. Krauser, and under Sadler's nose, Wesker, would accept this offer and the plan would take shape soon after. With Krauser being infected with another dominant plagas, the abduction would take place, bringing us to the events of the original Resident Evil 4. The first time Leon speaks to Sadler is right when we collect Ashley from the church in the beginning of the game. Right off the bat, Sadler gives off a strongly sarcastic and almost kind of carefree vibe with the way he speaks and the way his voice actor delivers his lines. It's made pretty clear early on that Sadler's using the Plagas and the cult's religion as just a tool to take over the world. He doesn't actually care about the religious side of the cult, he knows it's a total sham. To him, Los Illuminados is a means to an end, and that really shows through with how he is in his cutscenes and the things he says throughout the original game. Sadler appears in about 7 cutscenes. For the most part, he shows his face to try and either abduct Ashley from Leon directly or stop Leon from retrieving Ashley after she's already been taken. Sadler does a lot of talking in his cutscenes, and that's sort of his character's main appeal. His only real actions during the original are when he kills Luis and his boss fight at the end of the game. Other than that, he mostly shows up just to shit-talk Leon and steal Ashley a time or two. His character really lives and dies on the fact that his dialogue is so charming, with the cutscenes he's featured in being broken up by periodic calls to Leon over his radio. These are hilarious. With Sadler's sarcastic attitude and Leon's raging one-liner syndrome, these two make for some pretty funny dialogue when they're put together.
Since you're here, why don't I introduce you to it? It should keep you busy.
Can't remember the name, huh? A senior moment, perhaps.
Oh. Enjoy the fun.
Multiple times during these calls, Leon will say something quippy to Sadler, and he genuinely just laughs at it before firing back some other sarcastic remark. He's almost never serious, and he seems to really not give a single fuck about anything Leon has to say or anything that Leon does.
Just because you killed my small-time subordinate.
Sadler, you're small time.
Oh. Writhe in my cage of torment, my friend.
What?
Even down to Leon killing his own guys. For example, when Leon kills Krauser, Sadler straight up calls him and thanks him for it, saying that he was looking for a way to get rid of Krauser anyways, and that when Leon's parasite finally takes over, Sadler's gonna make him his personal guard. Sadler's a carefree, diluted villain with a humorous twist. That might be all Sadler is, but I'll be damned if they don't nail it there in the original game. Sadler is both games' final boss, with his fight taking place on the island at the top of the research facility. After mutating into a large spider/crab creature, Leon has to destroy several eyeball weak spots on his knees while keeping distance from Sadler on a large metal platform serving as the arena. This arena has large moving drawbridges on timers that Leon can use to get around if he's quick enough to do so. Sadler can be stunned and opened up to damage by a knife QTE or a few magnum rounds in a few different ways here. Leon can use levers around the arena to control a large crane, swinging a stack of steel beams into Sadler, causing big damage. This, along with the many explosive barrels set around the arena, can be used to quickly stun Sadler. It is possible to get the boss to stun without using any of this, and simply shooting him the old-fashioned way, but you'll get through this fight a lot easier and faster if you use the other tools at your disposal. Sadler can hit Leon with his tendrils, throw debris, and leap across the arena to the adjacent platform. Unfortunately for him, he doesn't get much of a chance to use these attacks as it's remarkably easy to stay away from him. This makes the fight pretty simple, and unless you're caught with your pants down, you can fairly easily not get hit at all during this battle. After enough damage is done to Sadler, Ada will throw Leon the famous red rocket launcher, and we can use that to put an end to Sadler for good. I always liked this fight as a kid, but since playing the game a few times as an adult now, I realized that I only liked it so much because of the spectacle of it. I mean, it's cool to hit him with the crane, and it's cool that he's so big, but in reality, it's a pretty simple fight that you can almost always do without taking damage. Unfortunately, Sadler is one of the lower ranking bosses for me here. Here in the remake, we get some more backstory on the Sadler family as a whole. In this retelling of the story, the Los Illuminados that were exiled by the Salazars for their use and worship of the Plagas all those centuries ago were actually members of the Sadler family, ancient relatives of Osmond himself. When these relatives were exiled, they fled to a small island off the coast of the mainland. This is the same island that we play on at the end of both games. Some of these relatives, Hester, Adam, and Keenan Sadler, left epitaphs that we can find on the island section of the remake. These chronicle the founding of the cult, meaning the Sadler family were the original founders of the Los Illuminados here in the remake, specifically Adam Sadler in the year 1554. These epitaphs go on to describe the worship of the Plagas and the exile of the Sadler family to the island. Even after many generations of living in seclusion on that island, the Sadler family kept their beliefs alive, worshipping the Las Plagas and building a research facility for studying the parasites on the island over many years that they resided there. Eventually, the Los Illuminados and their newest leader, Osmond Sadler, would venture back to the mainland and visit the Salazar castle to convince Ramon to let them excavate under the castle and retrieve the Plagas and blah blah blah. From here on out, it's pretty much the exact same as the original backstory-wise. The only difference being no one's ever infected by the spores in the mines in the remake. That got completely vetoed, and it's now only Sadler and the cult injecting people after they dig up the plaga that spreads the infection. We can read about the very day that the Los Illuminados came and injected everyone in the village in Mendez's note, Village Records, Volume 2. These changes to Sadler's backstory are great, for the sole fact that Sadler was a literal nobody outsider in the original. I've heard things online that he was supposedly a bioweapons engineer, but I could never get that actually verified, so it hasn't been included in this video. He was just a random madman that had no connection at all to the ancient Los Illuminados. All he wanted was to use the Las Plagas and the Los Illuminados as existing tools to further his own world domination agenda. Here at the remake, I think it was a way better idea to write his family into the story and make him a descendant of the people who founded the Los Illuminados. It gives him a way better reason to be doing what he's doing if he's actually a crazed religious zealot, and not just playing one because he wants the power that comes with it. During the events of the remake, Sadler isn't really around much. It seems like in this version of his character, his control over people infected with the Plagas is greatly increased, because most of the time in the remake, he's appearing to Leon through visions. He even seems to be able to control and cause people to have hallucinations, and he can do this from anywhere he wants. It doesn't seem like he needs to be close to them like he did in the original game. In these several visions, it's mostly just him monologuing about the cult and their religion, not really even talking to Leon directly. This time around, his character does away with all the sarcastic and humorous dialogue that he had in the original in favor of a much more serious and religiously righteous sort of tone. He's been reworked to actually believe in the Los Illuminados' cause, which is still world domination, but it's not just for him this time, it's also for his family legacy. It's for what he honestly believes is the greater good of the world. Sadler and all his dialogue are far more overtly religious here. It's not that I don't like this or I think it's bad or anything. The voice actor does an insanely good job, and with his backstory rewrite, this does make a lot more sense. But what made Sadler so special to me in the original was the sarcasm. It was the fact that he seemed very careless and aloof. So to not have that here in the remake, it kinda stings. Especially if you add on the fact that Capcom's done away with Sadler's radio calls to Leon. They did the same thing with Salazar as well. Throughout the game, he'll still show up to mind control and abduct Ashley, and he still has to deal with Ada when he attacks Leon while he's trying to retrieve Ashley, but other than this and his boss fight cutscene, unfortunately that's all there is to Sadler here in the remake. Sadler's boss fight here in the remake is leagues better than it was in the original though. Still damaging eyeball weak points on him, Sadler now has multiple ranged attack to keep Leon on his toes even at a distance. This was sorely missing from the original game, and the lack of range for Sadler really trivialized the fight. Here in the remake though, along with his basic melee attacks, he can charge into a grab attack, leap around the arena and destroy parts of it, leap onto Leon, and even do a Salazar style bile spew across the arena. Once you stun Sadler a few times, he'll jump into the middle of the arena and summon tons of Novistadors that swarm Leon before he jumps back down and rejoins the fray, making Leon focus both on him and on the swarm of Novis. Every now and then he'll jump back onto the pillar at the center of the arena and fire ranged attacks at Leon before jumping down once again. Unfortunately, there's no more crane to smack Sadler with, but once enough damage is done, Sadler will slip off the platform, morphing into a large mass of tendrils and spikes in a new second phase for the remake. Technically, this is a timed event, so you can simply just dodge his attacks and wait out the timer until, just like in the original, Ada throws down the red RPG and Leon can take the final shot. This is a great fight, and I thought it was an awesome way to end off the game. Just tweaked enough to be that much better, but not changed enough for it to be unfaithful. This is definitely my favorite entry into the remakes. I won't say everything is 100% perfect, but I can say the vast majority of the changes made to the characters and story were very well done and really added to the game and Resident Evil lore overall. I hold the original Resident Evil 4 very close to my heart, and at the beginning of this video I wasn't sure that this remake would end up being all that. But I do have to say, nice fucking work, Capcom. Holy shit, you made it to the end. I just want to say thank you so much for watching this far. this video was a skull-shatteringly huge undertaking to make. I've never really made anything like this before, and for what was supposed to be the very first video on this channel, I bit off far more than I could chew. This was originally just gonna be about the remake, but I found myself like referencing the original game so much in the first draft that I decided to record a whole playthrough of it, and then suddenly I was editing a video about both games and both games' stories and then comparing them, and it all just spiraled out of control until I ended up with the final idea for this like super video. I'm not sure how many hours it took to record and edit this, but I've been working on this fucking video for over a year now. I say I'm not sure about man hours because my old PC died, and then I burned myself out really bad at one point, and I had to stop for a bit so I didn't lose my mind. And you know, when I started making this video, I hadn't touched an editing software in, God, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. Like, I used to make some like random shitpost YouTube videos and stuff for basically just for me and my friends, not like even trying to garner an audience or anything, just for fun. But I learned a lot about editing, and I hadn't even done that for, like I say, 5 or 6 years when I started making this. So to knock the rust off with a video of this caliber was kind of stupid of me. So I wasn't working on it for a year solid by any means, but I'd say it took a few solid weeks, real solid weeks straight of work. But anyways, I think I got pretty much everything right. I wanted my research to be pretty thorough. I didn't want to give out misinformation, but I'm sure there's a couple little mishaps here and there. But I'm stoked to have it done, and I really hope you guys enjoy it. I think I'll keep doing some of this long form stuff because it's mostly what I watch on YouTube nowadays, and that's what I enjoy, so I think I'm going to keep going with it, but yeah. Anyways, once again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope I see you in the next one.